2030.
Saudi Arabia, the point of investment funds, there's a lot of excitement around NEOM specifically.
Every aspect of the kingdom, economic, social, cultural, religious.
The 2030.
The 2030.
This is the 2030.
Yalla.
Hello, Walla Hanaa, episode 16 of the 2030 podcast. Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I am great. You are in Singapore. This is another, I think, 11-hour time difference between us, which is amazing. You're on a luxury, all expenses paid, 5-star trip to Singapore vacation, but you're still hosting and joining us on the 2030 today. So thanks so much for your participation. It really means a lot.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a luxury trip. I am definitely here and it's lovely and fantastic. And we can talk more about Singapore another time, but I'm here for a one-day conference at the National University of Singapore on education in the Gulf. And I'm presenting a paper on vocational education and training in Saudi Arabia and where it is today. I've written quite a bit about this topic, and so it's great to kind of be able to update some of what I've already written and published in light of what the changes are in Saudi. I'm really excited, and we can do a deep dive on.
I think we should do that. Of course, I'm just teasing you, but it's nice to be able to still do this from wherever we are around the world. You just happen to be in Singapore this week. We're going to be doing a deep dive this week in just a few minutes on really a new report that has come out on fossil fuel use in 2023, which has a ton of data. So we're going to be talking about that in a second. Of course, we're going to finish this episode up as we always do with news. In the meantime, if we could just ask our listeners and viewers to subscribe to this wherever you're hearing this. If you are listening to it and you haven't subscribed yet, it does help us out a lot. This is an email from Aziz, my friend. Lucien, your tan is improving each episode that I watch on YouTube. Please keep it up and keep getting sun. You're already half Saudi, but if you spend more time in the sun, you might be even a little more Saudi. LOL. Thank you, Aziz, for that comment.
Sounds really relevant to our podcast, actually. Really relevant.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I do tan.
Feedback. Can people please send us feedback about what we're talking about? Like our content and our guests. This is great too. You do, I guess, need to have a tan if you want to be Saudi.
I guess so. I mean, but I'll always be Hawaja. I just think it's funny because we get a lot of feedback that's like, hey, good job, great episode, but it's not really insightful in the same way that commenting on my tan would be. And it's only tan relative to when we were launching the podcast, which was, really 9 weeks ago. So but yeah. But thank you, Aziz, for that. You didn't expect me to read that, and here we are. So yeah, so episode 16, let's get into a deep dive. This week, this episode for the deep dive, I want to talk about a recent report which is out from the Energy Institute, which was co-authored by KPMG and Kearney. Is it Kearney or Kearney? Do you know?
I've heard Kearney. I've heard Kearney.
Kearney. Okay, like Colonel.
That's weird,
okay.
Right?
Maybe we should have a Kearney guy or a girl.
We can have the girl come on and tell us. Yeah. Actually can be a guy's name, but it's more commonly a girl's name, especially in Saudi.
I've only heard
Do you know that there's a lot of names that can go either way?
I didn't
Arabic?
know that, but I would assume that, like Chris, right, in English?
Yeah, but Chris is often short for Christopher or whatever, or Kristen
Christine.
Or Christine. Or
Yeah.
My mom is Chris, right? And she's Kristen with an E-N. She always makes sure people
with
know
a
that.
K, K-R-I-S, or C-H? Okay.
K-R, Kristen with a K and an E-N. She's very particular because obviously you can spell it so many different ways. Anyway,
so let me
the Arabic
actually
is funny. It's
go ahead.
a lot of interchangeable names that, to the point where sometimes you don't even know that they're interchangeable, and you will think that you're talking to, somebody by email. I've made that mistake so many times.
Give me an example though, Weam, but I've never met a guy named Weam. I know a woman named Weam who's the best, but
yeah,
give me an example.
It's more common. So Isam Assam can
Assam.
go either way, which is a really weird one for me because I've only ever met one other woman named Assam, and I always thought people were referring to a guy until I met this person. This was when I worked in the school. So yeah, Assam. And then there's other names like Zain. I don't know. I'm sure I could think of a lot more do you need more?
No, that's good. I'm just trying to think of, so like especially in the United States, it's like almost Southern. It's like a very Southern thing to give, and maybe Western. I'm going to do a little reading on this, but to give a baby girl, a boy's name. Like Stuart is a very like Southern American girl name, like deep American
Is
South.
it?
Yeah.
I've never
so
met
I knew a couple
Stuart
Stuarts.
that's
Yeah.
a girl.
So you do it like in a family name kind of way. Like I knew several Stewarts way down south at the University of Virginia. So, but yeah. And Blair can kind of go both ways. Anyway, what are we doing here? This is the statistical review of world energy. But I do think that that's super interesting. We need to do something on this and names. Actually, to make one more point.
There's such good stuff on names in Saudi, like banning names that are allowed, names that are not allowed, things like that. So good.
There are names that are not allowed?
So many, yeah. And I have lots, like I have a great story about my name, but
and we have talked about your name a little bit.
Something else.
Okay, so just one more thing on names. It's our podcast. We can do whatever we want. So so like I have a third child coming. My wife is due or is expected to be due on Halloween, which is October 31st.
On the 31st. Exciting.
On the 31st. That's a scary due date. Yes, it is. And it's a boy. Shukran. That means congratulations, right? Is that?
Yeah, and may it be like complete and well, and
may it
good
be
wishes.
complete. It's a partial
good
baby.
Wishes.
Thank you. So it's a boy, and our first two children, we kind of had a decent idea of what we wanted to name them. It did change over the whatever pregnancy duration, 7 to 8 months. We had one change. This one it's a boy, and we kind of are all over the place on names. Like part of us wants to go like kind of crazy and out there, but I mention it because if you look at like the top 2,000 names for boys in the United States, it is like, it's wild. And then you compare that to like 1980. In 1980, it's like John, Jack, Steve, like Brandon or whatever. And now it's like Caleb and like Braxton and Chadwick, and there's like all these like names, and we're like so it just seems interesting that you don't have like the standard, like in Saudi Arabia it seems like it's like Khalid and Abdulaziz and Sultan and Salman, and you got the king's names, and it's like you got those four, and it's like the core four, and then you go from there, right? So anyway, and Muhammad, of course. So anyway,
and no, I mean there's definitely trends. So like I remember there was a year like Turkish soap operas really took off, and they're still big, but there was this one particular soap opera called Noor. And like Muhammad was the guy in the show, and I think it was the number one name that year was Muhammad, after Muhammad from Noor. He was blonde, he had blue eyes. People were like, maybe if we name our child Muhammad, he'll look like Muhammad, because there is this, aspiration to have like fairer skin, and even if we're trying to get you to be more tan, a lot of people are trying to be more fair.
Well, I could get those like contacts that make my eyes go from like blue to like green. Remember those things in high school, and like kids would wear those? It looks so
those
weird.
Are so popular these days, by the way.
Are they?
They're still really popular. Yeah, especially in Saudi. But like, how kind of people like to modify their looks with makeup and plus. Yeah, so contacts are just part of that.
Plus. Okay, this is the best part about doing a podcast with you, Hanaa, is that like we can just kind of talk and hit record, and we are now like 8 minutes off of our timing. Discussing the 73rd annual edition of the Statistical Review of World Energy, but I enjoy that very much. So there's a lot in this report. This report came out from Kearney and KPMG and the Energy Institute. And what I like about this, and the reason why I sort of want to do a deep dive on it, is because the information is very well organized. And I'm really kind of reading and working with a press release that was released along with the report to kind of contextualize what they have. But it kind of gives us a state of the union, or maybe at this point you could say disunion of global energy use and production, and also how we are getting our energy. And I think that's critical at this point because we are seeing a warming planet right before our very eyes. It is hot as heck here in Maryland in the United States. It's hot in a lot of places. It's getting hotter. It's additionally critical that we have these policymakers who are discussing what to do about global warming and climate change, that they are having shared data and they have transparency through data. And I don't know, like you have these COP 27, I think 28 is coming up. So to have reports like this that really just flatten the information playing field between these policymakers makes it easy for the media then to discuss what's going on and report on these things. So I think this report is very good. Anyway, so there are 5 key stories in the 2023 data, and they actually highlight them as such. I'm going to read them and kind of discuss them a little bit with you. 1, 2023 saw record global energy consumption with coal and oil pushing fossil fuels and their emissions to record levels. Global primary energy consumption overall was at a record absolute high. Fossil fuel consumption reached a record high, up 1.5%, driven by coal, which is crazy, 1.6%. Oil is up 2% to above 100 million barrels for the first time, while gas was flat. As a share of the overall mix, they were at 81.5%, which is marginally down from 82% last year. Emissions from energy increased by 2%, not good, exceeding 40 gigatons of CO2 for the first time. So and just a heads up, we got 4 more points. This is very much a mixed bag in this report. That data is not great. 2, data improves a little bit. Solar and wind push global renewable electricity generation to a record level. Renewable generation, excluding hydro, was up 13% to a record high. This growth was driven almost entirely by wind and solar and accounted for 74% of all net additional electricity generated. As a share of primary energy use, renewables, excluding hydro, were at 8% or 15%, including hydro. 3, this is something we know, of course, but the ongoing Ukraine conflict, Russia's war in Ukraine, cemented gas rebalancing in Europe. European gas demand fell by 7% following a fall on 13% from the previous year. Essentially what this point is highlighting is that war between 2 really major energy consumers and producers has kind of shifted the European LNG landscape. Number 4, and this is totally critical, dependence on fossil fuels in major advanced economies is likely to have peaked, the report says. In Europe, fossil fuels fell to below 70% of primary energy for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, driven by demand reduction and renewable energy growth. Good news. U.S. consumption of fossil fuels fell to 80% of total primary energy consumed. 80% seems really high still to me. 2024. Anyway, 5, growth economies struggle to curb fossil fuel growth, but renewables accelerate in China. Good news. In India, fossil fuel consumption was up 8%, accounting for almost all demand growth, and stood at 89% share of overall consumption. For the first time, more coal was used in India than Europe and North America combined. This report is full of interesting factoids and stats like that, and it's worth checking out. You can see it, by the way. It's the EI Statistical Review of World Energy 2023. Wherever you're seeing, listening, or watching this, we're going to have a link to it because it's just really good for you to look at, and it's really well done. It's at www.energyinst, as in energyinstitute.org/statistical review. Check that out, but we'll have a link to it if you're on your phone or on your computer. Check it out because it's really good. Anyway, just really quickly before I wrap this up, in the press release, there are a bunch of quotes from the various organization heads that produced this report. And this one is from EI President Juliet Davenport. Energy is central to human progress. It's also now central to our very survival, with global temperature increases averaging close to 1.5 degrees Celsius. 2023 was the warmest year since records began, and the increasingly severe impacts of climate change were felt across all continents. So what I like, anyway, so I'm going to kick it over to you because it's worth like discussing a little bit. But when you get these reports done by very reputable organizations, international organizations, and they're producing this content so that it kind of can be consumed in any way you want because the information in it is so important. I think this is really worth us, especially on a podcast dealing with or talking about the transformation in Saudi Arabia, which is an economic transformation, but it's also its own energy transformation, has its own green initiative. It's a topic we have talked about on this podcast before. Just think this is a good thing to share with everybody. And if you haven't seen it, go check it out.
No, thanks for bringing that to our attention, Lucien. I think it's really important that we do talk about these issues because I think there's so much being done in the space of energy and energy transformation and, obviously renewables and all of these things that we need to invest in, grow, and move toward in order to, secure our future energy supply and also B, mitigate the negative effects of fossil fuels as they, are influencing temperatures and extreme weather events, etc. And I think everybody that you speak to today, for the most part, is on board with this, the importance of investing in renewables. And Saudi has invested significantly in them, right? But it's at the same time, we rely very, very heavily on fossil fuels globally, as you just mentioned, everywhere. And to just pull the plug on that means that we will suffer quite a bit. And so the argument really is, we do need to transition instead of turn away from. And that's really hard for people who are angry about the effects of climate change because, it's too little, too late for a lot of people. Just yesterday, I was reading the Stop Oil Now protesters sprayed Stonehenge, this ancient monument here in the UK, with yellow, I think, paint that supposedly will wash away with the rain. But just ahead of, the solstice celebration, which is a big deal at Stonehenge. And they've gone into museums and destroyed pieces of art, and they've obviously stopped traffic all over the world in different, countries. And this movement about the climate emergency, yeah, it's important, but a lot of the paint they use probably has plastic in it. A lot of these things that they're doing are misinformed to some degree, but it's all this I want to call attention to the emergency. And instead of actually educating themselves on how we can do this better, they're wasting their time doing stunts like that, in my opinion. I think the stunts are very frustrating. So I think the report is important because it really lays it out. And actually, just last week, I was reading on the Twitter feed of a friend and colleague, Dave DeRoche, who's he's a professor at, I want to say it's a National Security University in DC.
David DeRoche. Yeah, he's my boy.
Yeah.
I love that dude. Yeah.
He posted the full-length video on his Twitter of the petrodiplomacy conference that was held by the Gulf States Institute in DC. And I mean, it's 3 hours or something, or maybe even more. Maybe it was 6. It was really long, but he was like, just watch it in snippets as you can. And I think it's really important. I mean, this is the 10th year that the Arab Gulf States in Washington convenes this event. Actually, it's really important to understand how important it is to think about how the world is interacting with fossil fuels and to think about, the finance sector and how that deals with it. And, just businesses that are dealing in oil and gas and exploration and all of that, they're not going to stop tomorrow. So what are the global concerns and how can we address them and still continue to invest in renewables? And I mean, I might be just talking about a whole bunch of different things at the same time, but these are the thoughts that I think a lot of us in Saudi Arabia have when we think about climate change and energy transition. We know it's a problem to rely solely on oil, not just economically and not just because eventually the supply is going to run out, but because it has negative effects on the environment. And therefore, we are working very hard to invest in renewables, in solar, in wind, and all of those come with their problems. And all of them also need energy a lot of the times when the solar and wind isn't available. And therefore, the battery storage and the production of batteries has improved significantly, but you still need ways to harness this energy. And we're not quite there with all of it. And I think that we still need the energy for everything that we're doing. And therefore, it's important to recognize where the debates are and to understand the point of view when these companies continue to operate in these sectors, that it's important for us to continue to do that while we figure out better ways forward.
I think the general frustration with many is that there's an awareness of something going wrong, that we're not trending in the right direction. And this is like steering an oil tanker, and you're kind of watching it being like, turn the ship in another direction, hurry up. And you can kind of see it turning. You have these conferences like annually done by the UN. You have so many conversations, and there's just, to me, like this was sort of settled when Al Gore had his movie come out and people were like alarmed. That seems like it was 2 decades ago. It probably was 2 decades ago. And it's like this oil tanker, to use a pretty apt sort of metaphor, is turning, and it's just happening so slowly. In the meantime, we are inundated with headlines that are not good, that make it seem like we are too late. And I think it's good that the tanker is turning and that we're seeing progress on some of these fronts. I mean, I saw in Reuters this week a report that said more than 800 coal-fired power plants. Now, remember, coal increase in places like India and China. I mean, that's a little concerning, but 800 coal-fired power plants in emerging countries could be decommissioned and profitably replaced by cleaner solar energy starting from the end of the decade. This is from research from the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. I just feel like I don't feel like not enough is being done. And yet at the same time, I also feel like, what more can we do? And then it's like, I have this sort of like sad, like, resolution that is just never get like, what does it look like? What's the world look like by 2050? It's like, we've hit our goals, but the planet is super hot and we have all these environmental disasters. I don't know. I mean,
so I completely agree. And obviously, the biggest argument when you're talking to people in, as we call it, the global south, or, in lesser developed economies is, you had your great heyday of economic development using all the fossil fuels, and now you're not letting us do it.
It was great. Yeah, it's the best.
Right. And obviously, that is not a productive argument. But at the same time, it makes perfect sense because there's obviously these huge populations across the global south that the countries need to grow economically to support these populations. And therefore, the argument, the double standard is frustrating, and it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow, but we still need to make a change, right? And I know it's not happening fast enough for a lot of people, especially people that are willing to go and, spray paint the Stonehenge and, I don't know, pour milk on the Mona Lisa or whatever. But at the same time, like, I, again, will bring up kind of just this idea of how young people are trying to find new solutions and really kind of doubling down on those types of specializations and understanding chemistry better and understanding energy, economics, as well as just the physics of it. And I think education, kind of like a broken record when it comes to that, is obviously a really big part of this solution. And so we really need to think about how we can start very, very young, talking about how we need to think about the planet. And more than anything, in my opinion, we need to spend more time outside in nature. I know it's hot some places and some times of the year, but the disconnect that we have with our surroundings is actually quite stark in the countries where we're making decisions about energy and where money can be invested and what we're going to support. People do not spend enough time in nature to understand how important it is to save nature. And that's really frustrating to me. And I think that the more I talk to educators about this, the more the solution tends to be spend more time outside. And then you will get more of a buy-in, because if you can connect those two and then also create that emotional connection, it helps. And then the pressure obviously goes in the right direction for what people are willing to back, what people are willing to finance, what people are willing to invest in. And then you get these young people really interested in this. And then they're coming out with great solutions to some of the really tricky problems that we have. They're very, very hard problems to solve because we're still, I think, looking at them through very similar lenses that we always have. And young people can really turn that on its head sometimes.
You hear that, Abdulaziz? That is why I'm getting a tan, and you notice the tan is because I've been outside appreciating nature, so that that there's better understanding of it, and that also that's a great excuse as well for me to play golf, which is what I need. But I just think that's a really good point.
Lawns are not the answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, perfectly manicured lawns, not the answer.
That's not what we should be doing. But
no,
it's
it just looks good though.
Play your golf, it's fine. I mean, yeah, but that's the problem, right? It's easy. And coal, we definitely need to stop using coal. We really should stop because it's dangerous on so many levels, and it is the most polluting of the fossil fuels. But it's easy, right? And when you don't have a lot of money in these lesser developed countries, that's what you're going to go to. So it is not an easy, we can't just stop using oil. That's not the solution. But yeah, how can we really make sure that our efforts to invest in the clean energy move fast enough? That's hard. I don't know if anybody
This
has
is going to be a topic that we explore on this podcast in greater detail and over time in a sustained way. We will have guests that discuss this topic because it's globally important, but it's also very important for Saudi Arabia specifically, which is the topic of this podcast. So this is something we're going to be on top of, and we're going to talk about a decent amount because we're interested in it, but we're also curious about how we are going to solve these. You just said it. It's a really complex problem. You can't just shut off oil and all fossil fuels. And even then, to be honest, what does it look like? The planet is no longer, is it going to get any cooler? Or anyway, we will have experts on to discuss this. And Hanaa, actually, you suggested earlier before we recorded this podcast, we should have experts on talking about things that we talked about so we can set the record straight. This is a great topic for that. And we have a few people in mind, so we will be doing that in short order.
Yeah, I think this is something that I do talk about a lot with colleagues and friends in Saudi that are working in the space, and I've already asked a couple that I know if they'd like to come on to the show and speak in an official capacity about the position of the kingdom on some of these issues. But I also know people that are working in the research space as well that could give an interesting perspective kind of on what's happening globally and what kinds of technologies are really taking off. Which I think is really important to think about. So, there's definitely some really interesting investments happening in this space. Just 2 days ago, I was going to say last weekend, but it was Hajj break, so it wasn't actually a weekend. But I met somebody that works in energy transition and policy, and we met very randomly. We're both part of the London School of Economics alumni network. Richard, this is a shout out to you. I hope you're listening. But we were talking very specifically about some of the challenges in places like Saudi. And so the outdoor, idea really came up as a big one because this is something that I wanted to do more of when I was teaching, is really make sure that we did these things. You can call it like a week without walls or more outdoor education and so on. But not only that, one of the things that we really talked about was food security and the relationship between climate change and agriculture. And so there are a lot of really, really sad and scary things that we can talk about when we're talking about climate change. But unless we actually also capture young people's minds by focusing on what they can do, I think that, we're going to lose a generation if we're not talking about the sparks of innovation that are really important. And so just, the proliferation of regenerative farming, for instance, is something that we need to talk more about. Really incredible stories coming out of all parts of the world where you're utilizing new technologies and ancient technologies to ensure that, we do have a food supply, because that's another thing, right? Like food tastes different when you don't have nutrients in the ground. And that's a big problem. So there are some really innovative things that are happening. So I'd love to talk about who's investing in renewables, but I'd also like to talk about how that's trickling down into other parts of our lives and how we're mitigating that in innovative ways.
Hanaa, let's get to the news.
Let's get to the news.
Shall I kick it off?
Please kick us off.
I'm kicking it off. Okay. Saudi Journalists Association participates in the International Federation of Journalists annual meeting. The annual meeting of the International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, is taking place on the 19th of June in London, bringing together IFJ representatives from across the world. It will be followed by the Executive Committee meeting on the 20th and 21st of June.
Yeah, and this is the first time Saudi Arabia has participated in this. And, as kind of this association, the federation get together, they are talking about how journalism is in a decline globally, and actually it's either completely or partly blocked in around 75% of the world. Only 20% of people now live in what is considered to be countries with a free media. It is a crucial time as people kind of migrate to social media for information that is definitely not long-form journalism. How journalists address this is really important, and it's great to have Saudi Arabia at the table. Their participation really kind of highlights the importance of building bridges with international federations for journalism. They can benefit from experiences globally and also just building better journalism skills. MHRSD bans working under direct sunlight. Now, this is not a brand new piece of news, but I think it's really important to highlight that to enhance the safety and health of workers, the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development, in collaboration with the National Committee for Occupational Safety and Health, announced a ban on working under direct sunlight starting June 15th, 2024. It's part of a broader initiative to create safe and risk-free work environments, thereby improving overall worker productivity in the Saudi market. This is not the first year that they have done this, and the regulation mandates that outdoor work must not be conducted between noon and 3 p.m. from the 15th of June to the 15th of September. It aims to prevent heat-related illnesses and occupational hazards associated with high temperatures during the summer months.
This is, as you noted, not the first year they've done this. This is a very important thing for there to be a government body establishing these rules and these safeguards for employees. By implementing this ban, HRSD and NCOSH aim to reduce the incidence of heat stress and related health issues among workers, fostering a safer and more productive work environment. The enforcement of this policy is expected to lead to improved worker health and efficiency, contributing to the overall economic growth and development of the Saudi labor market. So, makes sense, right? It's super hot in Saudi Arabia, across Saudi Arabia, and in the middle of the day when the sun is most intense, you really run the risk of heat stroke. And, Saudi Arabia is moving at breakneck speed to develop, but it has to do so safely. And so it's good to see this. This shows a very mature government in place and a mature regulatory regime that says, look, we need to set some rules here. It is too hot for people to be working outside during these times. And you have similar things in the U.S. It's interesting. I come from a worker safety family. Both of my parents at one point worked for the Department of Labor, so something that I have been attuned to growing up. But it's an important thing, and it's good for Saudi Arabia to have this policy in place, certainly. It should just be an annual thing.
Yeah, it has been an annual thing for several years. And, I think maybe it was kind of groundbreaking about 10, 15 years ago, but it's been an annual thing. And I think what's important to highlight is that you see less and less reports on fines for breaking the rules. So it's sticking, right? But you do also read reports of people getting fined, projects getting stopped and so on when the rules are broken. So it's really important that this is also enforced, and the media reports on it regularly.
Yeah, so, I have gotten some comments on my tan. You think I should spend no time in the sun, right? No sun exposure is good at all. But I feel like just a little kiss, you can get a little sunlight, it's not that bad.
I think we've talked about this before. Terrible, terrible for your skin, and I was actually just listening to a report on NPR where they were talking about how this generation thinks that sunblock is more harmful than exposure to the sun. Basically, you can get a little bit of sun and that's fine. The chemicals in sunblock are more harmful. And that is so false. And all dermatologists will tell you that it is false, 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 false. And they're seeing younger and younger patients with melanoma and other complex skin cancers coming in because they think that they don't need sunblock. So no sun is the only way. Like, I totally break that rule. Like, I like to suntan, you know.
But I do so. I'll
bad.
get like 20. Yeah, I get like 20 minutes in. I'm not like, I mean, if I'm playing golf in the middle of the day, it's impossible to not get sun. But I'm using heavy sunscreen, and if I'm by my pool, I do 15 to 20 minutes, and I just kind of to chill out in the middle of the day. And I always wear sunscreen because I don't want to burn. I want to get a little Caribbean mahogany glow.
But that's also a misconception, apparently. Like, a lot of these young people are like, oh, it's totally safe as long as I don't burn. Like, obviously, aside from the painful aspect of burning, it doesn't look great. But also, it's not the only, like, the second you see a change in pigment, apparently that's already mutations, and therefore it's already bad for you. Now, obviously, when you have more melanin in your skin, it's not as harmful. So, like, you know, I don't know, maybe repeat exposure makes it less harmful. Just get a little bit of sun every day.
Okay.
That's bad advice. I am not a dermatologist.
Yeah, none of this is medical advice. This show does not contain any investment or medical advice, just to cover our behinds legally. Number 3, Saudi Arabia has secured second place in the Global Cybersecurity Index in the World Competitiveness Yearbook, WCY, for 2023 in the Swiss-based International Institute for Management Development, IMD. Saudi Arabia has also ranked 17th overall in 2023, jumping by 7 places from 2022 in the overall competitiveness ranking, according to the Saudi press agency.
Yeah, so IMD is another one of these global indices that rank competitiveness and attractiveness of cities, actually. So here we are, you know, climbing the rankings, this time in cybersecurity. The International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, has also designated the kingdom as a global leader in cybersecurity, ranking Saudi Arabia second on its global cybersecurity index. And in Saudi Arabia, the National Cybersecurity Authority, the NCA, is the primary national authority for cyber concerns in the kingdom. It works to strengthen Saudi's cyberspace, enabling it to protect national security and vital state interests. It defends critical infrastructure, priority economic sectors, and government services and activities from cyber threats. So it sets the necessary regulations and parameters around that.
So Saudi Arabia is effectively the arsenal of the cybersecurity index, second place. It's pretty good. It's not the best though, but it's a lot of this is led by
second best.
Second best. First of the rest, depending on how you want to say it. But Saudi Aramco is almost certainly driving this. Saudi Aramco's cybersecurity posture or situation, I don't know how to describe it, but is often written about in the press because it's very advanced. They have to be. It's a huge energy company, right? So anyway, Mabruk, this is jokes aside, Arsenal jokes aside. This is big for them. It's good to see this.
Yeah. And just a little shout out to my brother-in-law, Abdurrahman, who works in cybersecurity at Aramco and tells us great stories about just how vigilant they need to be. So he always kind of helps us understand why certain measures are in place, explains it to laymen. Embraer identifies strategic defense markets in Saudi Arabia. So the Brazilian plane maker Embraer sees India, Saudi Arabia, and the EU, and as well as the US, as strategic markets for its defense unit. And it looks to expand sales of this C-390 Millennium, the head of the Embraer Defense said on Tuesday. So Saudi Arabia is looking to replace an aging fleet of Lockheed Martin's C-130 Hercules and is currently in early engagement with Embraer. Bosco da Costa Jr. told reporters at an event, according to Reuters.
Yeah, so this is a military transport jet that is medium size, you would say. they fly over my house here in the United States all the time. They're medium size for a military transport jet. They're actually huge in the sky when you see them, and they kind of lurk above, but they're an incredible aircraft. A potential Saudi purchase could reach 25 units. Embraer expects the country to make a decision in 2 to 4 years, the executive added. Expanding its presence abroad with more C-390 sales has been a key goal of Embraer's defense division, which also sees Sweden as a potential customer, of course, with all that is going on in Europe. So, yeah, interesting. Good piece of news here that just does not get to the top of your feed typically. It's nice to see this included. Yep. Sama publishes annual performance report of the Saudi finance and real estate company sector for 2023. The finance company sector saw a notable increase, with the paid-up share of capital rising 6% to 15.5 billion rials, which is back of the napkin hand math here, about $4 billion-ish. Additionally, total assets grew by 13% to $64.2 billion. Probably should have put dollar figures, 64.2 billion rials. And the dollar figure on that is $17 billion. Give me 17. I think 17's right, to be honest.
Which one is it? Are we talking about the
64.2?
They're all... 17. Well done.
Bam. Let's go.
17
go. Okay.
And Ksur. Right.
Okay. And then the total finance portfolio rose by 12% to 84.7 billion rials, which is about 23 billion.
22.5.
Rounding up, give it to your boy. Love it. The net income for the finance company sector.
22.57. So definitely you get it. Well
yes. Done. Look at that. The net income for the finance company sector stood at 1.7 billion rials. Jeez, which is, so what? $380 million. Anyway, in the future, we're going to include both, indicating a strong financial performance in the real estate. So that was maybe 3 out of 4. 3 out of 4 is not bad, but 350. Okay, 380. You said,
not 450.
Okay, hold on.
You do the math. I will Google the numbers and then share them with you
and evaluate my performance. Okay, cool. Yeah, the significant growth reflects the sector's expanding role in the kingdom's economic landscape. Yeah.
The report also detailed the loan portfolio classification, with the retail sector accounting for the largest share at 77%, followed by MSME sector. What is that? The MSME sector.
That's a good question. Look at us just hacking through this thicket of... That's micro, small, and medium enterprises. They should just say SME.
SMEs. Yeah, they just put micro in there to throw us off.
Yeah.
And I actually kind of knew that, but it just seemed like we were talking about something different, because we were talking about retail sector and then the small and medium enterprises, which can be in the retail sector as well as other sectors as well. So I don't know. I have issues with the way this was written by the reporter initially. So
I've never heard MSME. No. MSME. I've never heard that. So
no, I've heard it actually, or I've read it in the Saudi context, specifically looking at how Saudi defined small and medium enterprises, and then they came up with a new definition specifically on how much overhead each company has, with a definition for micro enterprises as well, and that's why they're including it.
So why aren't micro enterprises just small enterprises? That's
because of the amount of money that the classification changes with the overhead. You graduate into being a small enterprise after you move past being a micro enterprise. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there is a very specific definition, and it's different in every country, actually. It can be regulated, and therefore that changes the type of access to capital and funding that you get. So the classification is important when it comes to accessing capital and thinking about, kind of what services you can benefit from.
Okay, but in the
within
past,
growing
it would
SME
just be
sector.
SMEs, and everything that was smaller than M's were included. And so they've created a
True.
new class, which is
Yeah.
MEs.
Exactly.
Not a
Well, it's the
fan.
same as like with like microcredit versus getting small loans. You know, you can give really tiny loans that are not really considered loans because they don't really benefit the banks on the other end, and therefore, you know, that you have to classify them as something else. Anyway.
I see that, but okay. Anyway, so we're not going to need to
So
debate
this
it
is
now. Sorry.
similar. It's a similar. Anyways, yeah. Okay. Anyways, but you know the distribution. I think people are like done. They don't even anyway, read the report because Sama issued one, and if you're interested in the annual performance report of the Saudi finance and real estate companies sector, that report is available.
You'd think we would reread that, but no, we plotted through that. We got through it. We went number by number. We broke down MSMEs. Great job, Dr. Hanaa. Great episode. Thank you very much.
Do you need an Arabic word before we end?
I would say yes. Let's do the Arabic words. Sorry, I forgot. I'm definitely not on my game right now. You're introducing
We've been
MSMEs.
forgetting so many Arabic words. So I'm like trying to get back into the mindset where we definitely bring one up before the end of each episode. So remember, we're talking about street cred when we talk about these new phrases that I'm going to bring up. So I'm going to tell you a new way to say goodbye. You might know it, you might not. But have you, like, you can say ma salama, which a lot of people know. So I'm not going to give you that one. But a lot of people will say famanillah. Have you heard that?
Famanillah. No.
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually is fi aman Allah, which means in God's protection, like go in God's protection. But it's reduced to famanillah in kind of just, you know, the way people talk colloquially. And so, yeah, it's a great way to say goodbye at the end of a gathering, or when you're saying even goodbye on the phone, when you're saying goodbye on a text. It's a really good way to say goodbye that's different to ma salama.
Famanillah, right?
Famanillah, yeah.
Okay, I like that.
Exactly.
That's actually going to make me, that's good street cred stuff because they're expecting ma salama. But is that kind of like a peace out kind of thing where it's like you hear somebody say it and you're like, what? Yeah, okay. Nice.
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, this is great. Look, 16 episodes in, the street cred builds, the book builds for the 2030. Great episode. Thank you for that Arabic word, and thank you in general, Hanaa.
Thank you.